Good morning. Good morning. How are you? I'm doing great. You doing all right?
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for
Good to meet
stopping
you,
by.
Heather. I wouldn't miss it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for having us out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Morning. Cheers. Good morning. Good to see you.
Welcome to Plymouth State University. Marlon Collingwood, Vice President of Plymouth
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having us
State.
out.
The Panthers.
That's right.
Okay. Won the hockey championship.
Right on.
Students.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we have big ski country here.
Oh, right on. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having us out. Hey, good morning. Good to see you. Thanks for having us out. Thank you.
How do you like the frosties?
What's that?
How do you like the frosties?
Yes, I noticed that. I've never seen that
know those
before.
in Texas,
No, I've
no.
never seen that. We're gonna go this way. Hit the stage, guys. I'll go through here. It's just the camera. Thanks for having us out. Hey, that's O'Rourke. Nice to meet you.
Oh, perfect.
What's your name?
Okay.
Good. Everything's
Appreciate
good.
it.
Thank you. Allison, very nice to meet you.
I smiled.
So thank you so much for coming out today. This is such a good crowd. And thank you to Brian Dye and the Plymouth area Democrats and the Plymouth State Democrats for helping us put this together. And thank you so much to Beto O'Rourke for coming today to speak to us, coming to New Hampshire and to Plymouth State. We appreciate it so much. We're so excited to have you here. And so, thank you so much. And now everybody welcome Beto O'Rourke.
How's everybody doing today? I'm feeling pretty good too. We just made the drive from Claremont. Perhaps one of the most beautiful stretches of country that I have seen in all my years in this country. Most of that spent in the desert Southwest, my hometown of El Paso, Texas, where I have, in my 46 years, never seen a sign that says Frosties. So this is new to me. And I was telling Chris and Cynthia and Soham, if I were to go back in time and be a 19-year-old again and start a punk rock band, it would be called Frosties. And that's what I would do if I were born here in New Hampshire. Thanks for having us out. Isabel, thank you for getting us kicked off. Everyone, thanks for taking some time out of your day to participate in your democracy. Though I have been in your state less than 24 hours, we got here last night, had a great event at Keene State. I can see that you take your role and your responsibility in helping this country select the next nominee for the Democratic Party very seriously. And I'm grateful. Regardless of whom you support, come summer of 2020, we will all be behind the same person, on the same team. And whoever she or he is, we want them to be successful not only in defeating Donald Trump, but in January of 2021, being able to hit the ground running, bringing together a deeply divided, highly polarized, very partisan country around the common cause and the common goals, starting from the common ground necessary to meet this set of challenges, unparalleled in the history of this country. An economy that works too well for a few people, does not work well enough for far too many more. I understand that when this college was first created, it was created to help educate the teachers who would provide the future, the education, and the support for the children in this and other communities. Throughout America right now, especially in my home state of Texas, you have public school educators, those teachers, those nurses, those therapists, those social workers, those cafeteria workers, and school bus drivers working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet right now. You have a state in New Hampshire where college and higher education is out of reach for far too many, and where you hold more student loan indebtedness than almost any other state in the union. How can it be that we have produced such disparities in wealth that some families have an extra $3 or $4 million to game the college admissions process, but there are some families that can't come up with $300 or $400 for the down payment on tuition at a community college or a four-year university? We need to make sure that this economy works for everyone. We will not have a democracy that reflects everyone. Theodore Roosevelt, one of the great progressives who was responding to the last concentration of wealth and power and privilege that we had in this country, said you will not have something like political democracy in the United States if you don't have something like economic democracy in the United States. Every single one of our children should be able to expect that if they work hard, if they play by the rules, they're going to be able to get ahead. That is not the case in so many parts of this country, and it is especially not the case for so many and so many specific communities. If you think about the fact there's 10 times the wealth in white America as there is in black America, if you think about how hard it is to accumulate and pass on wealth for some communities, to not have that down payment for a college education or a car or a home or the seed capital to start a business, we begin to appreciate some of the divides that we have in this country. When that is compounded by the fact that despite being the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most technologically and medically advanced country known to humankind, there are millions of our fellow Americans who cannot see a doctor, who cannot afford their prescriptions, who cannot take their child to a therapist. You have in the United States of America, in the year 2019, people dying of diabetes, of the flu, of curable cancers, because we have not formed the political will to ensure that we take care of them. And we have lost them prematurely young, diminished lives, the opportunity of their being able to raise their family, or work a job, or pay taxes, or shoulder their fair share of the burden, or create works of art that will accrue to the benefit of all of us is lost to all of us until we make the investment in all of us to allow us to rise and reach our full potential. We have a system of immigration in this country that has lost sight that we are comprised of asylum seekers and immigrants and refugees from the world over. And I would argue their very presence makes us stronger. My hometown of El Paso, Texas, might very well be the case in point. We form in El Paso one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. Along with Ciudad Juarez and Chihuahua, Mexico, 3 million from 2 countries speaking 2 languages, joined, not divided, by the Rio Grande River, forming something far greater, far more powerful than the sum of our parts or people. 2 nations producing 1 people. And El Paso, Texas, one of the safest cities in the United States of America. Safe, not in spite of the fact that we are a city of immigrants, safe because we are a city of immigrants. If we're going to meet the challenge of policies that have followed the racism of a president who has described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, a president who sought to ban all Muslim travel to the United States on the premise that Muslims are somehow more inherently dangerous or violent or I do not know what, and we need to rewrite our immigration laws in our own image, from our own values, from our reality that we experience in our own communities. When we do that, I promise you that the more than 1 million of our fellow Americans that we call dreamers will be free from any fear of deportation because we will have found the will to make them U.S. citizens in this country that they are contributing so much to already. Instead of building a 30 billion, 2,000 mile, 30-foot high border wall that will force us to take our fellow Americans' farms and ranches and property and homes at a time of record safety and security on the U.S.-Mexico border, We can invest those resources in our communities, in making college more affordable, in saving the jobs we already have, and increasing more of them. And the challenges, the greatest challenges of them all, that threaten the very existence of the human species on this planet. The fact that the scientists have concluded, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that climate change is real, that it is produced by our own excesses and emissions and inaction, that the planet has warmed more than a degree Celsius since 1980. And if it warms another degree in the years to come, the forest fires, the floods, the storms, the droughts, the devastation already visited upon our fellow Americans and fellow human beings caused by climate change today will become that much more worse. The storms and droughts more frequent, more devastating, and more profound. Our ability to grow our own food and fiber to feed and clothe this country and the planet undermined, compromised, perhaps made impossible. Living in the desert Southwest, there will not be the water to support life in the town that I call home, where we're raising Ulysses and Molly and Henry right now. But the scientists also tell us there are 12 years left to us, the human race, within which to act. And if this country, which right now is the lone country on the planet that has refused to sign the Paris Climate Agreement, can once again become the indispensable nation to not only do our part and lead by example, but to convene the countries of this world around our common purpose in saving the people of this world. Not only will we avert the worst of the disasters that will come to our kids and our grandkids and the generations that follow them, we'll also be able to make them proud, show them that we were a match for this moment, that we put our differences of race or religion or immigration status or party affiliation behind us, got after the big work before us to find ourselves not by our fears and our smallness and our pettiness, but by our ambitions, our aspirations, the resolve, the ingenuity, the creativity that we're willing to put behind by being good to one another and ensuring this world is habitable for the generations that follow. For all of those reasons, I want to make sure that we do everything in our power while we can. And that's why Amy and I have decided to run to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. Come here today to Plymouth to listen to you, to learn from you, to answer your questions, to hear your suggestions, your ideas, your guidance, and your advice. I have no hope of winning your vote. I have no hope of being your nominee. I have no hope for delivering for you as President of the United States if I have not first shown up and listened. So that's what has brought us here today. I'm hoping to have a great conversation with as many people involved as we can. I'll try to be brief in my responses so we can bring as many people in. Cynthia, do you have a microphone?
Yep, right here.
Cynthia's got a microphone. If you'll raise your hand, she'll bring it out to you. But Plymouth, thank you for the hospitality and for having us out here today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great to see you here. You spoke about better salaries for educators. What do you think of the past education policies, race to the top, no child left behind, and what's your view of the federal role in improving education? Not just the student loans, beyond that, what happens in the classroom?
Great question. A couple of thoughts. First day of kindergarten, the child is 5 years old. Some kids in her classroom are already going to be 10 months behind in reading comprehension, 12 months behind in math. That's day one of kindergarten. There will be no time to press pause and catch up. You are consigning those children to more limited options, narrower futures. The chances they'll graduate from high school, go on to college, earn more in their lifetimes is diminished. So I would first like us to start education for every child universally in pre-K at 4 years old instead of 5 years old. Move that starting line back, give every kid something approaching an equal start. Let's also recognize something that I never experienced growing up, and most of the people looking at the composition of this room never experienced growing up. In that same kindergarten classroom, if you are a child of color, you stand a 5 times more likely chance to be disciplined, suspended, or expelled at 5 years old for the same infractions that a white child might commit in front of the same teacher. So understanding our schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline is connected to education policy, to criminal justice policy, and to confronting some of these hard truths. So recruiting teachers who look like the students before them is so important. Paying them a living wage so they're working 1, not 2 or 3 jobs, and doing it in states like New Hampshire and Texas that do not have an income tax, rely on the property tax payer to shoulder the burden, as states, in our case Texas, pay a lesser and lesser share of the cost of public education, pushing out that cost and that burden to local property tax payers, meaning that we are not fully funding our obligation to those children in those classrooms. My idea is, why not have some federal support for those overburdened local property tax districts, conditional on states re-upping their commitment to quality, world-class public education. Let us also make sure that those teachers do not face the threat of our tax dollars, their tax dollars, being converted into vouchers and sent to private schools to compete against the very classrooms that they're in right now. And we specifically ask about No Child Left Behind and other federal K through 12, soon pre-K through 12 education policy. These high-pressure, high-stakes tests force teachers to teach to that test. They produce a level of anxiety in that classroom that we feel at home in your work household. On the eve before our kids take those tests, they are freaked out and they cannot sleep. And there's a good chance that they are transmitting the anxiety that their teachers are feeling, because so much of their opportunity is defined by how those kids do on that test. We're not allowing teachers to respond to the call that they first heard of unlocking the lifelong love of learning in those kids in front of them. I mentioned my son Ulysses. He has that name because Amy and I did not have the guts to name him Odysseus. Reading the Odyssey, cover to cover, in a classroom, opened up so many doors to me when I talked to high school seniors who are reading the abridged version of the Odyssey today, because there are so many days set aside for standardized test prep, means that we have our priorities upside down, means that we're not getting the most out of those teachers. I want to return some control into that classroom, give them the support that they need to succeed. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for being here. You gave me a good excuse to get out of school.
Happy to oblige.
I wanted to ask you about a recent bill that just went through the Senate about 2 weeks ago. And the bill was that if an abortion was performed on a viable fetus and the fetus survived the abortion, the doctor would then be compelled to give that living baby the same care as any other pregnancy baby that came out, and put that baby through the care. Would you support this bill that does not in any way limit abortion and simply seeks to keep babies alive that have been born alive?
Thank you for the question. The way that I would approach your question and this issue generally is to trust women to make their own decisions about their own bodies. When I talk about universal guaranteed high quality health care for everyone in this country, it's primary health care, it's mental health care, and it's women's health care. And I'll tell you why. In my home state of Texas, we have shut down, our state legislature, our governors, more than half the family planning clinics in our state, making it that much harder for women to get a cervical cancer screening, see a family planning provider, or see a provider of any kind. We also, not coincidentally, are at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis that disproportionately affects women of color 2 to 3 times the rate of white women in that state and across the this country. So women's health care, reproductive rights, Roe versus Wade, all the way back to 1973, the law of the land. This next election will decide all of those issues because it will also decide the composition of the Supreme Court, our ability to ensure the rights, the protections, and the lives, I want to make this clear, the lives of the women in our lives and in our communities. And for that reason, I support a woman's right to choose. Thank you for asking the question. Looking for Cynthia, right here.
There we go, to your right.
Thank you. My question, I have two questions. What will you do, and at what point in your term, if and when you are elected president, about the huge student loan debt crisis? Number one. Number two, what is your stand on legalization of marijuana on a national spectrum? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I mentioned the unique role that this state plays in showing the rest of the country the burden that so many of our fellow Americans shoulder in student loan indebtedness. We are more indebted here in New Hampshire than any other state. On average, we're looking at between $37,000 and $40,000. That's an average. That means some former students can count in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they are going to pay back over the course of their lifetime. And as you probably know, or if you don't know, I'll share with you, student loan debt is the one kind of debt you will never shake until you pay it off or until you are in the grave. It will stay with you for life. $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now. First step, stop digging the hole. Stop putting people into this kind of terrible debt. Let's make sure that high school students graduate both college ready and career ready. We're seeing early college high schools across this country where those students don't pick up a dime of debt, graduate with an associate's degree, are ready to earn on day one after they receive their high school diploma. Jobs that pay $25, $30 an hour. High value, high wage, high skill, the kind of jobs that we're not doing a good enough job filling right now. Let's make sure that if you're one of those who has some of that outstanding student loan debt, that we refinance it at much lower rates, the same way that we'll refinance your home or other kinds of debt that you hold. Let's also ensure, if you're willing to come back to an underserved community, work in in-demand profession, it's going to help to rebuild that community, rebuild this country, serve those who have already served. I think about the 49,000 open, unfilled, funded positions at the VA today that consign too many veterans waiting too long to be able to get in and see a healthcare provider, losing 20 veterans a day, every single day in this country. If you want to be on the front line of helping those who put their lives on the line, I want to make sure that we forgive your student loan debt. So, loan forgiveness, refinancing of existing student loan debt, and ensuring that you can go to community college, debt-free, public-serving four-year university that is publicly financed, debt-free as well. Cost should be no barrier to advancement and realizing your full potential. Yes, end the federal prohibition on marijuana. To your question, the second question. And then go a step further. Acknowledge the fact that we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, that is disproportionately comprised of people of color, too many doing time for a non-violent drug crime, many of them for possession of a substance that is legal in more than half the states in the union today. How can those at Purdue Pharma, who are in part responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of our fellow Americans in this opioid crisis that they helped to produce? We are 4% of the globe's population. We consume 85% of our opioids. The heroin and fentanyl that our fellow Americans are using are a byproduct of the legal prescriptions with which they began. And yet we're locking up people of color for possession of marijuana, putting them behind bars. When they get out, checking a box that says they have a conviction, meaning they don't qualify for a student loan, meaning they cannot get a job. So not only must we end the prohibition on marijuana, we must expunge the arrest records for those who serve time for a non-violent offense. And have real accountability for those who perpetrated the kind of addiction crisis that we have now. Thank you for the question. Kano. Here we go.
How would you address the epidemic of gun violence in this country?
So I was talking about my kids earlier. Last spring, our son Henry, who's 8 years old in first grade, comes home. We ask him about his day. He talks about his school teacher herding him and his classmates into this big closet, shutting the door and teaching them how to resist the urge to open that door when someone impersonating an active shooter busts into the classroom and starts knocking. I think about the horrific school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas. And in the wake of that, a reporter puts a microphone in front of one of the students and says, "This had to be a huge shock. Did it surprise you when that gunman walked into your school?" And one of the most chilling things I've heard, she said, "No, I expected that was going to happen sooner or later." 30,000 plus of our fellow Americans are going to lose their lives to gun violence this year, and every single year going forward until we do something different. We either accept that we are uniquely wrong, violent, bad, evil, this is an act of God or a force of nature, or because no other modern country has anything approaching this level of bloodshed, that we understand that this is a human-caused problem with a human solution. I know from those states that have adopted universal background checks that it reduces gun violence by upwards of 50%. It won't save every life. It'll save a hell of a lot more lives than we are doing now. Thanks to you and your public pressure, the House of Representatives just a few weeks ago passed universal background checks. Now we need to keep up the pressure on our U.S. senators to ensure that it passes there and that President Trump signs it into law. But I don't think that's enough. One of the positions that I've taken in a proud gun-owning state, where we own guns to hunt, for self-protection, for collection, for sport, is that we should no longer sell weapons that were designed for the express purpose of killing people on a battlefield as effectively, as efficiently, and as great a number as possible into our communities. We shouldn't sell them unless we expect more of the same from what we've already received. When I listen to those who have survived these kinds of massacres, when I listen to those who live in communities where gun violence is so commonly known that their children's deaths don't even make the newspaper or the nightly news, they suggest the solutions to these problems. And so whether it's the two that I just mentioned, locker laws to ensure that young people cannot get a hold of their parents' firearms, red flag laws that ensure if you are a danger to yourself, you're a danger to someone else in your life, we go through a deliberate process of ensuring that you can no longer do that. All of these things make sense, have come up from the very communities that have been affected. So let's lead on this. Let's bring the country together around saving more lives. Thank you for the question.
I have time for a couple more.
Okay.
What can or should be the federal government's role in helping states like New Hampshire curb the heroin and fentanyl epidemic?
We should follow the lead of New Hampshire. In the short time that I've been here, I've heard about a program called Safe Stations, which ensures that these heroic first responders, firefighters, EMS techs, if you show up at a fire station and you have a problem with addiction and you need to get some Narcan or something that's going to help you recover from that, without any fear of being involved in the criminal justice system, we will take care of you through the public health system. We will meet your challenges with compassion and care, long-term care, to get you back on your feet. I was just in Pennsylvania yesterday, and they prescribe with every opioid prescription, you automatically get a prescription for the overdose drug that you need to recover if you have taken too much of that opioid. We need to follow the lead of the attorneys general from these different states who are trying to hold Purdue Pharma and those executives responsible and accountable for the death that they have brought to this country so that we stop having it. And then the gentleman's question about marijuana. These things are related. I served with Annie Custer for 6 years on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. I held a town hall like this every single month, all comers welcome, no holds barred. And I cannot tell you how many times veterans stepped up and told me about the opioids that they were prescribed at the VA. We know that those who are struggling with addiction the overdose deaths that we have seen in our communities began in almost every single case with a legal prescription. At a meeting like this, a veteran stood up and he said, I was prescribed opioids by the VA. The VA belatedly acknowledged they had a crisis in overprescription, and so they cut my prescription off without any therapy or replacement or alternative. And in this crowded room, he admitted that he buys heroin on the street. It's the only way he can treat himself. He's not a criminal. He's a hero. He put his life on the line for this country. Let's treat him in that way. The same doctors at the VA who prescribed him the opioids tell me that they can instead prescribe medicinal cannabis, which is not addictive, from which you are not going to die, which will alleviate your symptoms, give you a quality of life so that you can get on with your life. We'd be doing so much better and save so many more lives. So whether it's Pennsylvania or New Hampshire, let's follow the lead of those on the front lines who have the solutions. Thank you for the question.
All right, last one up here. Up here.
So you talked about gun violence, and I'm a huge opponent of the Second Amendment, and but I understand it can be limited in some ways, such as the First Amendment is limited. We don't have the right to yell fire in a threatened theater. You can't threaten people. You can't incite violence. So we can limit rights. But you call for banning assault rifles. But I guess what do you consider an assault rifle, and why do you think it's more dangerous than any other weapon?
Thanks for the question. And I want to make clear, if you own something like an AR-15, and I'm your president, keep it. Continue to use it responsibly. I don't want to take anyone's guns from anyone in this country. But I'll also tell you this. When I listen to emergency room physicians, those women and men who treat gunshot wounds, they tell me a handgun wound, if it does not hit your heart, if it doesn't hit a major artery we get to in time, we'll be able to save your life. An AR-15, which is a variant of something that was designed for battlefield use, that high impact, high velocity round will blow a hole out your back the size of an orange. You will bleed to death before we can get to you because it's exactly what it was designed to do. Keep that enemy soldier down to keep our soldier alive. Now, that's perfectly fine for the battlefield and necessary for the battlefield. I see no reason for it to be sold into our communities when there are so many other firearms that somebody can buy. But I understand and I respect that different people will come to different conclusions on this incredibly important issue. We, who purport to be the world's greatest democracy, within which we have its greatest deliberative institutions, should not be afraid of the conversation that you and I are having. And yet, because of the power of the gun lobby, the manufacturers, the NRA, which can buy and sell, make or break political careers and elections, too few members of Congress have been willing to step up and do the right thing. Too few presidents have been willing to lead. It's one of the reasons that we don't take a dime from the NRA or any political action committee at all. All people, all the time, every single part of this country. Thank you for the question. Thank you all for, nope, you're telling me there's one more, okay.
As an international student from Canada, I know what we're doing for the southern border, but I'm just wondering how you plan to support both northern and southern border countries.
Right. So this is a great question from an international student from Canada talking about the borders. I mentioned the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico border where Amy and I are raising those kiddos that I keep talking about. You're asking about our border with Canada. I would love the foreign policy of the United States of America to begin focusing on the Western Hemisphere again. How was it that we were shocked and surprised that little kids traveled 2,000 miles to our front door in Texas? How did we not know this was happening? When it comes to Canada and Mexico, they're the two largest, or among two of the largest markets for what we grow, what we produce, what we manufacture. The jobs in communities like these are connected to the markets in countries like those. When we vilify, demonize, demean those countries and their leaders, as our current president has done, not only do we jeopardize the goodwill and the good standing of the United States of America, which has been purchased with the blood and sacrifice and service of hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans, we imperil and we undermine and we jeopardize the very jobs that our communities need to thrive. So I want to bring Canada and Mexico closer to the United States. I don't want to wall them off. I certainly do not want a wall on our northern border any more than I want a wall on our southern border. And I want to make sure that we treat all the nations of the world, given the challenges that we have before us, with dignity and respect. And that's something that we can get back to going forward. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. All right, Cynthia is telling us that's it. Plymouth, thank you for having us out here today. Very